Welcome to The Explainer. I am so incredibly excited to share this one with you today. We're looking at what is essentially a true roadmap to spiritual awakening. Based on some deeply profound classical texts, this explainer breaks down exactly how to conquer 6 fundamental human urges. It's a truly fascinating look into human psychology and self-mastery, exploring what actually happens when we stop being controlled by our senses and start controlling them instead. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into the agenda for today. We'll start with the illusion of atonement, then move on to mastering our speech, taming the mind, and anger, looking at the 3 bodily demands, and finally, figuring out if we are a master or a servant.
Section 1. The illusion of atonement.
So, the source text kicks things off by pointing out a huge flaw in human behavior, right? The absolute failure of superficial repentance. It brings up this incredibly vivid metaphor from Parikshit Maharaja, the elephant's bath. Just picture it. An elephant takes this wonderful, refreshing, cleansing bath in a river, only to step right out onto the bank and immediately cover itself in dirt all over again. I mean, what was the point of the bath? The text points out that thieves, or even folks who do weekend confessions just to go back to the exact same sins by Monday, are doing the literal exact same thing. Taking a punishment or simply saying sorry doesn't do a thing to stop the root desire to commit the act again.
Because these superficial apologies are just like that elephant's bath, the text argues that a sinful activity cannot simply be counteracted by a pious activity. It just doesn't work like that. Real atonement is something entirely different. It's not just taking your punishment, it's the actual awakening of our dormant consciousness. It means reaching a state of real, genuine knowledge, where that underlying desire to commit the destructive act completely vanishes. We literally have to wake up our original, pure knowledge. So how do we actually wake up? Well, the text introduces this concept of tapasya. This is basically the foundational cure to that elephant's bath problem. Tapasya is a methodical, regulated life practiced specifically to revive that original knowledge. By controlling our mind and our senses through very specific principles, we build the exact framework we need to actually conquer the 6 specific urges we're going to explore today.
Moving on to Section 2, Mastering Your Speech.
And this brings us to the very first urge we absolutely have to conquer, our everyday, almost uncontrollable desire to just open our mouths and talk. And the text draws a stark, really brilliant contrast here. On one side, you've got the croaking toad. Everyone who has a tongue wants to speak, even if it's total nonsense. But the toad's constant croaking is literally just sending a signal to the snake, essentially inviting its own death. Materialistic chatter is perfectly compared to this croaking. On the flip side, we have transcendent words. Engaging our speech in purposeful, spiritually elevated topics, like glorifying the Supreme, actually liberates us from that destruction. It's a real game changer.
But here's a really fascinating distinction. Controlling your speech doesn't mean just forcing yourself into some self-imposed silence, which is a concept known as mana. The text explains that trying to create this artificial vacuum of silence, it ultimately just fails. True control is actually a highly positive process. You have to replace the nonsense with meaningful, transcendental topics. You don't just stop talking, you elevate exactly what you are talking about.
Section 3. Taming Mind and Anger.
All right, once we've addressed our speech, we really have to look inward. We're transitioning to the subtle, internal urges that heavily dictate our external actions, right? Mostly the fickleness of the mind and the absolute heat of anger. But before we can really understand the mind, we need to define a crucial term from the text, maya. Maya simply translates to illusion, or darkness, and this is the fundamental obstacle the mind faces when it gets restless, fickle, and totally agitated by all our material desires and plans. So, what does this all mean, and how do we actually conquer this darkness? Well, the text compares supreme knowledge, specifically Krishna, to the sun, and Maya to darkness. Now, what's really interesting about this is that, just like with our speech, creating an artificial vacuum in your mind doesn't work at all. Just trying to negate all your thoughts? Total failure. Instead, you simply introduce the sun. If you fill your mind with supreme knowledge and service, that darkness of illusion naturally and quite effortlessly just vanishes. And the text applies a very similar, incredibly practical wisdom to anger. We honestly can't stop anger completely, it's a natural force, but what if we apply it rightly? Frustration over unfulfilled material desires, well, that causes toxic anger. But the text gives these amazing historical examples of anger being utilized properly, in service. Think about Hanuman setting fire to Lanka in a state of anger, yet he's revered for it. Or Arjuna being incited to fight a righteous war, even defending against blasphemy. The absolute key here is that the anger is redirected in a purposeful, righteous way, rather than just stemming from selfish material frustration.
Okay, Section 4. The 3 bodily demands.
Now we're shifting focus from those subtle internal urges of the mind and anger directly to the deeply physical, primal urges that so often completely dominate human existence. And the text makes a really profound anatomical observation here. It asks us to look at a literal straight line of senses: the tongue, the belly, and the genitals. Physically, if you think about it, they are situated in a straight line right down the human body, and the text explicitly links their demands. The bodily demands basically kick off at the very top of this line with the most voracious, uncontrollable sense of them all, the tongue.
Because the tongue is just so overwhelmingly powerful, the text introduces what is essentially the ultimate spiritual weapon for conquering it: prasada. Now, prasada refers to the remnants of food that have been offered to the Lord. Instead of eating just to satisfy the totally whimsical cravings of our palate, which, let's face it, just traps us in material demands, a person controls the tongue by exclusively eating this purposeful, regulated food. It's a highly analytical, super practical approach to neutralizing our most frequent daily craving.
Let's move on and see exactly how this builds, because the logic here is absolutely incredible. Controlling the top of that straight line creates a massive domino effect. Step 1, you master the tongue with prasada. Once the tongue is actually controlled, step 2 naturally follows. You restrain the belly, aided by observing fasting days like Ekadashi. And then, once the tongue and the belly are subdued, step 3 finally becomes possible. The urges of the genitals are automatically controlled and regulated solely for proper religious purposes, like begetting spiritual offspring. It literally all cascades down from mastering the tongue.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Master or Servant.
This right here is the true culmination of our explainer. When a person successfully controls these 6 urges, speech, mind, anger, tongue, belly, and genitals, a massive identity shift occurs. The text presents this incredibly powerful juxtaposition. You are either a Goswami, which translates to the master of the senses, or you are a Godasa, which means the servant of the senses. So the crucial point is that a true master isn't someone who just bosses around society or a community. They absolutely must first and foremost be the master of their own internal senses.
And the text offers a pretty stark warning about the fate of the Godasa, the servant of the senses. Those who just leave their senses unbridled for the sake of material gratification, they're basically dragged straight into the darkest regions of ignorance. They become totally trapped in this repetitive, unfulfilling cycle that the text brilliantly calls chewing the chewed. It's like this endless loop of trying to extract flavor from a piece of gum that has already been completely exhausted. Constantly seeking satisfaction where there is literally absolutely none.
Which really leaves us with this final, vital question to reflect on. Are you the master of your senses, or are you their servant? Seriously, when you look at your daily habits, your speech, your mind, your reactions, and your bodily demands, who is actually in charge? The blueprint for true self-mastery is right here, just waiting to be applied. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I really hope it leaves you as inspired as I am. Catch you next time.